Welcome everybody to the Mind, Body, and Soul television show coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado internet studios. We are also streaming live on YouTube Live, as well as at Hangouts and at consciousevolutionmedia.com. I'm your host, Coach Steve Toth, and also the founder of Conscious Evolution Media, going on 12 plus years and 15,000 plus shows, and we are no longer counting. And I'd like to introduce a very, very interesting and intriguing guest with us this evening, Dr. Srini Pillay. He's joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, Steve.
It's great to have you. And of course, I'm going to ask my usual first question, which is, well, Dr. Srini is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School, and I'm sure there's a lot of other titles that goes with you. But I'm gonna just make a suggestion. What if I would have the power, and of course I don't, but if I had the power to take away all the titles that everybody has ever called you in your life to this point, if I take them all away, what's left? Who is really Dr. Srini Pillay?
Well, I think it's a great question, mostly because I don't know that that I strive to be just one thing or that I claim to know who I am. I think that the process of being alive is really about evolving in the knowledge of myself. So some of the associations I had to an answer to that question when you asked it was something I added to my Twitter handle recently, which is mad about you. And really, I think what that indicates is that deep down, I feel sort of unusually connected to people a lot of the time. And I think there's something about that connection that I'm curious about from an identity perspective. And if you wanted one word, I guess people have said words like humanist, but I prefer not to just have one word because I don't want to claim to know myself, and I don't want to claim to just be one thing at one time.
Okay, great. That's a fantastic answer. So I was connected to you as soon as I first saw you. And, I don't know if the viewers that are in the chat room right now and all the people that are watching us all over, if they realize that this show that we've been doing, actually the show that you're on right now, and we're having this dialogue on the Mind, Body, and Soul TV, it's been around for the longest time on this network. It's the show that I started the network with 12 years ago. And what's interesting to me is that none of this is scripted, and people a lot of times don't know. They think that there's a lot of preparation. So there was no preparation on your part, and there's no preparation on my part. And I feel so connected to you already as soon as I saw you. And so how I know who I am in front of is I get immediately goosebumps. So that's my that's my indication that I'm speaking with somebody, or I'm having a dialogue with somebody that's vibrating at a very similar frequency that I'm vibrating at. So I feel very comfortable asking you the following few more questions that I used to ask at the very beginning of the show, which was 12 years ago. And I stopped asking because people couldn't answer it, but I can tell just the way I'm connected to you that you'll have the answer. So the second question is,
sure.
What do you want? Why did you come here?
To tell the truth, I actually even forgot that this was on, and I couldn't even remember what the method or medium was that got me here. So, at a really concrete
I'm not talking about being on the show. I'm talking about being on the planet. Why did you come here?
Well, I'd love to take responsibility for that. But I'm not sure that I can. I mean, if you're asking something about meaning and purpose and what I want to manifest in this world, I think what I would love to manifest is, I think, something related to a concept that Aristotle talked about. So, these days, a lot of people are talking about the fact that we're connected as a society, and that somehow, despite all the technology that we have, that we're not as connected as we could be. And I'm not a fan of intentional connection or intentional giving, because I feel that it's at a lower vibrational frequency. What I much prefer is inspired connection and inspired giving. And Aristotle talked about this notion of eudaimonia, which is well-being, which related to meaning and purpose. And he believed that man's greatest mission was really to give to others. But he departed from some of his colleagues in that he talked about the fact that whatever it took to make you feel more self-connected, whether it was a new fast car, whether it was a great relationship, whether it was buying yourself something, whatever it took that was on the way to connecting with yourself was really important, because when you are most deeply connected with yourself, you discover beneath this metaphoric water table what this actual connection is. And from that place of connection, there's a kind of euphoria that makes you want to connect with others. And I think the reason I'm crediting him is that I think he was, he articulated that purpose for me. And so in response to your question of, why am I here? I think I'm here to manifest that self and other connection and a certain kind of non-dualistic consciousness that I think will continue to reveal itself to me in the world. I think over the course of my life, what I felt is that the more the physical boundaries between myself and other people disappear, the more I can experience their essence. And I feel like in the presence of that essence, some really magnificent energy manifests that feels creative and feels like it's related to this purpose on earth. And so again, I'd love to say I know what it is and I know why I'm here, but I don't. I think what I do know is that I am here to continue to experience a certain depth of self-connection so that I can connect with others, and in so doing, recognize the fundamental creative power of non-dualistic energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And so I may want to just add to that I'm here to do this, to do what I'm doing, because this is my passion. What my passion is really to explore who I am, to learn who I am, and to actually do what our theme is, which I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show. So our theme for tonight is how to unleash your greatest potential. And in your words, doing it scientifically. I am actually very, very curious to find out what I am capable of. And that's really what, if I could use the word, turns me on.
Sure.
I want to know what is my maximum potential, why I am here. And you mentioned a very important word to me that I keep remembering every day, which is to be innovative and to bring something new and to bring to the world and to my experience and to bring something that has never perhaps existed before. Does that make sense?
Yes, and in fact, that's the thing that most excited me about this interview. I loved the fact that there was no preparation. I loved the fact that I had no idea what we were going to be talking about, mostly because I really believed that what that would do is leave me vulnerable and just in the space of having to connect with you. And I knew that if I could be vulnerable in that way, that we would find a way to connect with everyone who's going to come across this particular conversation. So I'm super thrilled about that. And I think maximum potential starts with the willingness to be vulnerable and the journey through vulnerability.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. It's a willingness on our part to take a risk. Like you mentioned earlier, or maybe you haven't yet, but I saw this on your website. Actually, it's one of your books that talks about overcoming fear. And I can comfortably say right now that I have no fear. Like, fear has disappeared. And the way fear disappears from my everyday existence, not that it doesn't come back time to time, but it disappears when I'm connected. Am I connected to what? I'm connected to, who I really am. When I'm connected to source, I don't know what words to use. After 12 years of doing this, I'm having sometimes some challenges coming up with the words that describes my experiences. I may have to create new words. Yeah. I'm finding the English language to be limited.
I think language is just a representation of what's happening at the level of being, and I think the brain, to the extent that it represents being, has all this electrical activity going through it. So when we try to use words to represent what we're feeling, what we are is something, the electrical activity represents something that we are, and then the words represent the electrical activity. So it makes sense to me that you would not necessarily have the words, because if you are connected to who you are, it's actually separate from the words. So having
very much, yeah,
having said that, I can imagine. So I'm putting myself in the position of the listener, and I'm like, well, the listeners here, obviously, if anyone's listening to this, I would like to just put the intention out that this intention is to leverage our connection for the listener to be able to also connect with their own maximum potential. And from a scientific perspective, if you're wondering, like, what's this vulnerability thing? Because I know sometimes some of that language really puts people off, and I'm not somebody who only wants to speak to people who speak consciousness talk, or people, I don't need the science to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing or my experience through life. But I love that it gives me something to hold on to. And I think it's scarier than a lot of people think to be vulnerable. And there are a lot of different perspectives on this vulnerability. I think if we take into account the first thing that you said, Steve, which was that you don't feel afraid because you are present in yourself. If you look at one of the leading theories on fear, it's not fear itself that's the problem. It's fear of fear. When you start making yourself two, when you have an observing self and an experiencing self, and then you start reacting to the fear, is when this fear really starts to have negative consequences in your life and starts to actually interfere with your potential. So I think for a lot of people, and certainly for myself, the striving is, on the one hand, when it is convenient, to take advantage of this non-monolithic self, meaning the self, like, apparently we say things to ourselves like, come on, well, someone's talking and someone's listening. The truth is, the self is one, but in that moment we make it two. When we make it two, it's helpful because talking to yourself can change your brain. But if you stay there and you stay in the split state, you will continue to have fear, because the self, when it is continuously divided, actually generates this kind of fear. It's the first step in fearing fear. So the first thing I would say in thinking about the fact that anyone would want to be thinking about their lives and their potential is, how much of our days do we spend not having this constant observing presence and this experiencing presence, but just having this a unitary sense of self, just this oneness. Don't you think, is that what you were referring to when you were sort of talking about sort of feeling connected with yourself?
Yes, and I want to add something to that, and what that is so this is not just a network or a show where we just talk about consciousness. I actually created this whole network so that people can actually experience it, feel it, what it's like to have conscious dialogues, and to actually feel and to see people that are conscious. I consider myself a conscious human being, although it's not like there's some place to get to. It's for me, it's a continuous growth process. But the reason I can do this show the way I do it is because I managed to make the chatter in my mind most of the time disappear. For sure, on these shows, I am able to completely make it disappear. There is no chatter. So because there's no chatter, that allows me to be connected to who I really am, is how I experience it. And I see you, and I see the viewers, and I see the world as a completely, beautiful place and an enjoyable thing to do, because there's no place I'm trying to get to. I'm just being in the moment, and I don't have this conversation distracting me from being with you, and even sometimes hear what you're not saying. Like, I can feel sometimes that you may be talking, but in between the sentences, there's some moments of quiet, and I can tune into that and feel what you feel. And people might say, "This guy's crazy," but that's not so. I'm really having these experiences because that's how close I am able to listen to you. What does that bring up for you?
Firstly, I believe it. Secondly, I'm experiencing it. So If you're crazy, I'm crazy too.
Okay, that's good. And I share myself because you were talking about the way this thing started. Is vulnerability, and I love being vulnerable. I actually, and I didn't used to love it. I learned that if I'm going to do this show effectively, or any other shows that I do, then I must be willing to walk the talk. The time where we just talking down to people and the viewers, I think that time is over. Because people are more and more tuned into their feelings, more and more tuned into what they're experiencing. And just because somebody is a good talker, that doesn't do it anymore.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so I shared my life a million times on the network, and I share my experiences, things that happening to me every day, not just for my benefit, but a benefit of the viewers, because all I can share is my experience, and I'm just being truthful about what's happening with me and what's happening with my life.
When you talk about that, it brings up an idea, a framework that I read recently that I found particularly helpful. One of the ways that people talk about consciousness is they talk about noetic consciousness, which is about knowledge, and then auto-noetic consciousness, which is about the spontaneous flow of thoughts that comes from the kind of presence you were talking about, like the presence between the sentences. And then there's anoetic consciousness, which is just the symbolic fragments that are also an important part of identity, but haven't necessarily come together to form a story. And I think as I'm talking to you, in terms of trying to understand what this vulnerability is, I have in me an intention to bring up not just my noetic consciousness, which is all this kind of academic framework that I'm talking about, but autonoetic consciousness, in that I don't really have a specific direction. This is a spontaneous flow of thought. And anoetic consciousness, because there are symbolic fragments that I think will come up in our dialogue that it would be great to take a look at. And I'm just declaring that I'm open to whatever those fragments are.
Okay, so would you be willing, because I'm willing, would you be willing to share something with me and the viewers, something that happened to you today that you were vulnerable, and what took you there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was a happening today specifically. I think today was sort of more of a sort of, meeting to meeting kind of day with a couple of different postings. Let me try to be reflective on this. What made me feel? Actually, there was, this is a difficult example because it was about a friend who was hurting because he had been in a difficult situation in his marriage, because he had found out that his wife had been having an affair. And so part of what I was feeling like that I needed to do was to be with him while he was trying to work through that difficulty. And I think my first feeling was that there wasn't anything cognitive to say, like this is the thing to do and this is the right thing to do. The thing to do was just to manifest the friendship and the love through presence. So we FaceTimed when it was possible. I hung out with him, and something felt better, I think, for both of us. I felt better that I could be there. He felt better that I was there. And I think that kind of vulnerability is pretty cool because there's no, academic construct. Like, what are you feeling right now? How much does it hurt? Of course it's hurting. Of course it's...
There's no coaching, and there's no solutions. There's no ideas. There's no, you got to do this, you got to do that. None of that. You were just being there with your friend. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wow. And I think that's a pretty awesome privilege to be able to be trusted in that way and to be able to hang out in that space without, any necessary sort of coaching. And it was funny, we talked about embarrassment, and, he had talked about the fact that there was some kind of embarrassment that he had felt about telling people about this. And I didn't want to say, well, don't be embarrassed. I was just looking at him kind of incredulously, like, we're so close. Like, what? The embarrassment must only come because you're not recognizing in this moment what our friendship represents. And I didn't really say that in that many words. I just looked at him and I said, I don't really know what you're talking about.
Okay.
And so he looked at
So,
me and he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I don't know. I just don't know what you're talking like embarrassment. Like, I mean, anything I say around that's going to sound ridiculous. Like, we're such close friends. Like,
uh,
what are you saying? You think I don't experience difficulties? Think I have a perfect
so like
grasp
you,
of it?
you are like completely naked in front of me right now because of what you're going through in your life. So what?
Yeah. So what is this? And I don't know. It's just I just was like, well, maybe it just takes time, right, to recognize that someone is with you lovingly. Certainly, when I think about the people that I impact or the people who are in groups where we have conversations, the most powerful thing, I think, is love. I think the dialogue takes second place. It's a way of communicating and shaping that love, maybe being creative with it. But in terms of, you asked the question at the beginning of the interview, why am I here? It has something to do with loving.
Yeah, for sure. For me too. Most importantly, I learned recently how to love myself. For most of my life, I didn't love myself, didn't even know it. So what came up in this conversation a number of times that really intrigues me is emotions. Can you speak to your experience of emotions and why do we have them? Because I'm finding that most people have no clue why they have them and what to do with them.
Well, there are a number of ways of thinking about emotions, right? So emotions are they're really responses to stimuli in the environment that are generated, broadly speaking, from the limbic system in the brain. And they often arise spontaneously, although sometimes, if you have to conjure an emotion up or fake enthusiasm, so, you can fake it till you make it,
Yeah.
when it comes to emotion. But I think when authentic emotions arise, they arise from the limbic system. And I think for a lot of people, the challenging part of that is that they're not able to control them. It's not like checking off a list or something. It's like all of a sudden you realize you've been rejected by someone and you feel incredibly sad. Or all of a sudden you realize that you're lonely or that your mortality is striking you. You feel a feeling of dismay, sadness, regret, even happiness. I mean, all kinds of emotions. I think emotions are phenomena that I think of fundamentally as electrical impulses that are in the brain. And to the extent that we can have them, I think they can make us feel alive. But my fundamental feeling is that there's something beyond emotions that can be experienced as a pleasant state. So I don't think emotions are a unitary thing. I think when people talk about it, they talk about it like happy, sad, or regret or love. I think of emotions positively when I'm connecting with other people, but also there's a part of me that thinks of them as illusions, that they're distractors from another state of being that is more pleasant. And I think sometimes in my own meditation, I have an experience that's not emotion that makes me aware that there's something beyond what emotions are. So at a physiologic level, I think there are electrical activations that that activate a number of brain regions, often deeply within the brain, and that people strive to control them by using thought control mechanisms. And one of the things I like to do is to help people try to manage their emotions, because when emotions are still, there's a sense of being that comes up that people have access to, and I think that is what the self is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you kind of touched something. You touched on something for me when you were talking about positive and negative. Not exactly in those words, but you did touch on positive and negative emotions. And I'm just, the experiences that I'm having these days is, I'm realizing that, this could be pretty funky. So for many, many years on this network, and this includes myself and others, we have many shows, but one of the shows that I've been doing for 4 years is called Living Consciously TV. And the reason I created that show is because I wanted to have I kind of designed a show after a network show on commercial television called The View. And I said, I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yes, I am.
I said, if 5 people can get together on a commercial television show and be completely unconscious 98% of the time, we sure be able to put together a show where we have 5 people on the show and we will be 98% of the time conscious. And what would that feel like and what would that look like? Well, I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
That's cool.
But guess what? After 4 years of running that show, it is working beautifully. And the reason why it's working beautifully because all of us are recognizing that having a positive attitude and being in a positive energy is what creates happiness and what creates joy. And I used to think that, with other people as well, that we must suppress negativity as much as possible. But at the beginning, I didn't realize it that way. At the beginning, I thought I actually started the shows with negativity. And then I jumped into the positive aspect of things because I recognized that every subject has 2 ends. And you talked about it on the show earlier, that there is this duality, there's this design of humanity where we operate in this duality. And you did say something about you are working on something. Did I hear that correctly? That takes us beyond this duality.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's my personal experience and mission, and I think my intention is while I am exploring that personally, to also recognize this connection that exists amongst all human beings. So yes, I think this non-duality, I find it's a persuasive hypothesis. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, come on, what are you talking about? Like, how do you know that?" I'm like, I don't think I know anything. I'm saying that I have a hypothesis, and I'm exploring the world through the lens of that hypothesis. And for me, non-duality is a pretty persuasive hypothesis, not because there is actually a lot of scientific evidence, by the way, to back this up. For example, there was a study done recently where they had someone in Spain and someone in India, and they had them say words like "hola," and they had one person think the word, not say it aloud at all. They connected their brains to a computer, and then they had a person on the other side have the computer connected to their brains. No one could hear anything. But the person in one country, when they thought the word, that word could be transmitted electrically through the computer, and the person on the other side could hear it. And what that proved was that thinking can be transmitted through the internet, not just sound. And that, to me, is a really remarkable piece of evidence to show that we are connected. Because all it says is that we are connected. We just have to find the right channel, so that when you find that channel, like the internet, or like Skype, or like Google Hangouts, that the connection becomes manifest. So there's a part of me that says, you and I are not necessarily talking because we set up something, but there's a possibility that we are already connected, and that connection led to some kind of intelligence of like, hey, there's a method, look at this method. But the method doesn't create the connection is already there. It simply allows the connection.
Sure.
But I
have no doubt about that. I mean, this entire network, Doc, is operating on the laws of attraction, which is your other book. I mean,
right.
we are searching each other out without actually necessarily looking for each other. It just, you come into my life and I come into yours. You have this manifestation of me and I have a manifestation of you, because you are a lot about what I'm about. And so there is something I felt that there was something to do together, and you are extremely interesting to me, and you also are an explorer, and I'm an explorer, and I put these things to test. I mean, these things that I talk about or people bring to me, or I bring to myself, I actually put to test in my life. I actually walk the talk and
right.
see how it works, and does it actually work? And so earlier, I just wanted to complete that about positivity and negativity. I don't feel the same way about negativity and positivity the way I used to. So now, because I am in the belief for myself that as long as I'm feeling, and I don't care if it's positive or negative, I am alive. And that's a good thing. The person that I can't do anything with, the ones that are completely resigned and cynical, and they really don't feel good or bad, they just kind of exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those people, there is not a whole lot to do with. Not that that's a judgment. It's just what's so. I wouldn't have them on the network, so they don't come here, because I don't attract them.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking when you were saying that there's one of the ways I think about this is that the way you feel has to do with, there's a certain part of it that has to do with choice. So the brain's attentional network is like a flashlight, and depending on what you shine your flashlight on, you'll pick up certain things. Now, if you want to really feel sad, there's enough tragedies going on in the world. You can spend all your time shining the flashlight on negative things in the world. You won't be wrong, but you just won't be taking care of all of the diverse capacity of your brain. So one of the things I like to tell people is, remember, you have an attentional flashlight, and if you have a choice, you can have a choice to say, because I want to be self-connected, and I do love something about feeling good, and I love something about making others feel good, why not spend part of our day consciously, even if that it's not describing, we have terrible days sometimes, but you can still spend 15 to 30 minutes of the day recognizing positive things that exist. There is a choice. So I think to a large extent, feelings are not just the activations that occur in our brain, but they're also what we decide to pay attention to in ourselves and in the world.
Oh, absolutely. Thus, I disconnected commercial television because I'm not interested. There is nothing on commercial television that I'm interested in staying in. Now, I can watch a newscast for maybe a minute, and if it's too negative, I must move on. Next.
Right.
It's like, why am I going to stay there for? There's nothing in it for me. So, what I wanted to explore with you also is this whole subject. I mean, you did write a book about the laws of attraction, and I know The Secret, created a lot of interest about the laws of attraction, but I don't feel that most of the people out there really understand how it works, like that we can't turn it off. And I'm beginning to recognize that it's not even what I say, like what's coming out of your mouth or my mouth. It's what we putting out. It's like we are almost like a television or a radio broadcasting station. Our energy is putting stuff out, and it's not necessarily about what we say. Does that ring through for you?
Yes, and even at a biological level. So there's a network of neurons called mirror neurons, which exist in all of our brains. And it was first discovered in monkeys, where they found that if you move like this, then if I move like this, then in your brain will activate as if you are moving just like that. It mirrors my movement, except it's subthreshold, which is why you don't keep on moving. But they subsequently found that mirroring happens not just for my movement, but for my emotions and my intention. So if I have a negative intention and I come to this interview with some kind of negative feeling, you're going to immediately pick it up because your mirror neurons are going to pick that up. So all of a sudden, I've taken my negative energy, deposited it into your head. Then I start getting angry with you because I'm seeing my negative energy not just in me, but in your head. And so it makes me, it perpetuates the cycle of negativity. And one of the things I think that the law of attraction is about is when people say, if you're negative, you draw negative things to you. It's because if you're feeling negative and I'm activating negative mirror neurons that represent negative emotions in you, it perpetuates that cycle. And that's one mechanism.
We could say the universe just brings us more of it, right?
Right. And so I think that's one example of how the law of attraction can manifest physically. And then there's the example, we were joking at the beginning before we got on, this thing about I said, I'm not going to keep on asking you when we log in. When you're ready, let me know. And you said, yeah, but how come when people say they're not going to do something, they always end up doing the exact opposite of what they want? And
like, I'm not going to interrupt you, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're interrupting.
Right. And there's a theory called ironic process theory, which Daniel Wegner discovered. He unfortunately died recently, but he spent a lot of his life showing that under stress, the brain does the exact opposite of what you want it to do. So if you say, the classic example is you're at a party and you're holding a glass of red wine and you're walking across the room and you're telling yourself, do not drop the wine. The next thing you know, you see a couch, and before you know it, the wine is all over the couch. And so people are like, how? You just told your brain, do not drop the wine. Why was your brain so stupid that it actually dropped the wine? And what they found is that under stress, effectively, metaphorically, the brain doesn't hear the word not. Under stress, it's already so stressed, it uses up all its energy, and you get this negative priming effect, and you end up doing the exact opposite of what you want. So it's the same thing. They found this for soccer players. If you attach eye tracking devices to soccer players, and you ask them to score penalties, if they say, do not kick the ball to the right, the eye goes to the right immediately. And it's the same thing with office romances. You say, tell yourself, I'm not going to fall in love with that person. They've shown this in studies. You end up feeling that. So when you are under stress, it's important to frame things as what you want to do. Because when you say don't do it, your brain does the exact opposite of it. And that's another kind of principle that I have in the book on the law of attraction, because it's it's one of the ways in which we attract negative things to ourselves by framing things as don't rather than what you want to do, because under stress that doesn't work that well.
Awesome. Well, we have tons of people in the chat room, so I just wanted to invite anybody that has any questions for Dr. Srini. Go ahead and ask him, and I'll just repeat them on the air here, so you can actually interact with him as well. I don't have to control this whole show by myself because I just don't have that need. So so make the show more interesting. So this is fascinating stuff. So let's talk a little bit more about the laws of attraction, because I'm fascinated by that. And I have these interesting experiences that I know that most people know what it is that they really want. They really do know. Deep down in their hearts, they do know. But then for some, really, we're just end up walking the opposite direction in their lives. Like, isn't that like crazy? Like people say, I'd like to make more money. And then the next thing they talk about is that they don't have any and they are broke. So how does the universe hears that I'm broke? You're going to get more of it, right?
Right. Yeah, well, I think one of the things that happen, I mean, there are a lot of things that happen in that case, but one of the things is that we have conscious desires and then we have these unconscious desires. And I think our conscious desire may be, I want to make money. And so when your brain has a navigation system where it gets all this information, and then it tries to say, okay, let me take you there. Now, the conscious brain actually works really slowly. Nobody knows exactly whether you can talk about it in terms of bits per second or not, but there's a lot of data out there that suggests that it's in the realm of, like maybe 60 bits per second. But an unconscious brain is more like, millions of bits per second. So what is below, if you are deliberately saying, I want to make money, that's a slower process. The question is, what's going on under the radar in your unconscious brain? And we have a lot of evidence to show that things are going on in your unconscious brain as you're trying to figure things out. Now, one of the hypotheses around this is that, let's say I always like to use this metaphor. I like to think of your brain as sitting on its brain throne, sitting in your head in its throne and saying, okay, tell me what you want. And you say, hey, dear brain, I want to make a lot of money. Your brain's like, good idea. Let's feed it to the...
Or I want to win the lotto. How about that one?
Right. That's what I want, and so I'm going to do it. Then you start saying, oh, but not everybody wins the lotto. Most people don't win it. If I win it, I'm going to have all this money. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to use it? People are going to coming after me. So you start feeding your brain all these unconscious messages, And then your brain's like, hey, I don't know what you want. Do you want money or do you not want money? Because it seems to me, on the one hand, you're telling me you want money. On the other hand, you're telling me all the reasons that money could complicate your life. You go figure it out. Once you figure out what it is you want and you're in alignment with what you want, then we can make a plan. But right now, you press in the navigator, you're saying, you're looking and you're saying, take me to this town, and then you're entering 20 other towns at the same time. I don't know where to take you. So it's not that it's that complicated for the brain. I think one of the things we have to do, and I think I'm certainly guilty of this, I think a lot of people are, sometimes we forget that we have these negative memories from yesteryear, and we forget that there are influences on our current goals that keep us from getting there. There's a great theory recently called the selfish goal theory, which basically says that in your brain, your goals don't really care about you, they just compete with each other. So if you have a goal that says, I want to make more money, but your other goal is, I want people to know that I am a victim. If your victim goal is stronger than your money goal, then your victim goal is going to race to the finish line. It doesn't matter. So obviously I'm oversimplifying some of this, but I think this particular theory...
I like simple. I really do like simple.
Yeah. But I think it's sort of remarkable because what it does is it makes us want to say, well, what other memories am I carrying in my head that are holding me back and keeping me back from being what I want to be? Because in the brain, one of the things we were talking about earlier on, this noetic and autonoetic, and when your brain is in a state of mindfulness, or when you are vulnerable and you're not actively focusing and thinking, what's amazing is that your brain is like a time travel machine. So it can go to the past and look at your memories. It can be in the present, and then it predicts the future, so you know where you're going. When you are in a state of mindfulness, it activates these memories and the overlap between the past circuit and the future circuit. And the more you begin to feel mindful, the more it activates both your memories and your imagination. And so you get more data input that then allows your brain to say, hey, you've given me a lot of information. You're telling me exactly where you want to go and how you want to go there on your own terms. One of the things I loved about what you said earlier on in this interview is that the days of talking down to people or telling them what to do, they're gone. That's because I really do believe that the level of consciousness has been elevated. And I really do believe that the brilliance, with all of this knowledge and scientific knowledge, that's great. But the thing that's truly great is what resides in the person, himself or herself. And these are just paradigms that are useful, but they're not that useful if you don't put yourself in it. And that means, what's your own personal memory that's holding you back? What's your own personal memory that can help you move forward? What is your own, and how can you put these puzzle pieces together to predict your future? I think the power of mindfulness is that it activates this default mode network, which is this presence circuit, and that really helps the past and the future to connect, and it allows you to create a clearer path towards your goal. So, even with all that knowledge, am I present all the time? No. Sometimes I'm completely outside of myself. And then I'm like, how come nothing's working out? And why is my email box full of nonsense emails? What's going on? And then I'm like, okay, just stop for 15 to 30 minutes and just realign some things. There's no perfection. I think knowing these mechanisms doesn't guarantee that I can actually execute them instantly. But I love the fact that I don't see science as being apart from spirituality. I see them as being metaphors of life that are explaining life in different ways.
Oh, sure. And science is constantly renews itself, just like life.
Exactly.
What was true yesterday, tomorrow is no longer true, or today. We learn something new. We expand. It's all about expansion. I believe that's what consciousness is all about. I'm expanding as a human being, and that's what I'm interested in doing every day. I want something new in my life. It's like, because somebody, well, I'm sure my parents, and this is true for all of us, they taught us how to scan with our eyes, how to taste with our mouth, how to hear with our ears. everything is being taught to us, and we are so hooked. It's like, have you seen this new movie called The Room?
I haven't. No.
Oh my God! It's
What's the movie about?
Now, what the movie is, I don't want to ruin this, so I'm not going to tell you the end. But what the movie is about this woman that goes out at night in the dark, and this guy actually kidnaps her and takes her to her house and to his house, and he has a shack behind the house, and he puts her in there, and of course rapes her and locks her up, and then he designs a security door where he's the only one that can enter, and it's with a password. And then she has this baby boy, and they are living there, the two of them, for 7 years. And this boy doesn't know anything about the world. He only knows about the room. And so what's fascinated me, and I was crying. Like, I do this a lot. I cry when I hear music. I cry when I, and it's a happy cry. You know what I mean? It's not, I'm not sad. And it was so beautifully done because it gives us a different way of looking at things and a different way of proving that what is being fed to us is what becomes our reality. It's not even real. You know what I mean? It's the closest way you can come to the understanding that because the boy was living in this room, that's how he knows the world is. He doesn't know any different. And he buys it hook, line, and sinker. It's amazing. You got to see it. Everybody's got to see it.
Yeah, I would love to see it. No, I mean, I think environment is such a strong influence in the narrative and the story we tell ourselves. But
he's happy, Doc. He's happy in that 12 by 12 room.
Because that's what he knows the world to be, and
that's what he knows.
He's not in a constant state of comparison. So, how come I don't have that? And why don't I have a? I'm all for ambition. Like, I love ambition. I do think, however, that ambition is really powerful when it comes from a desire to understand the bigness of this connection in the world. I think when we become fixated on objects, and I am very guilty of that from time to time in my life, you realize eventually that it doesn't bring you that kind of happiness. That as fun as that kind of ambition can be, it's more like a security mechanism. The real feeling you want is, I think, this expansiveness of life. Like, one of my favorite books that I have at home is this book called Megalomania. And it has the most ludicrous pictures in it. It has, pictures of, like, it would seem incredibly tasteless when you look at this. It's like the most highly decorated, like, Venetian rooms. There's a diamond-studded pink Mercedes in Russia. There's this big African leader and stuff. You look at it, you're like, okay, why does this look so overdone? First you think. And the next thing you think is, you know what? I don't know if this is the energy that this represents is actually even smaller than the energy of the world. It's fetishizing the energy. It's taking the energy and making it into some kind of object or fetish. But in reality, I think that is the opportunity in consciousness. The opportunity in consciousness is to experience the reverberation of that largeness in the world. And, when people say to me, okay, now what are you talking about? Like, largeness, what, reverberation? Nothing's reverberating. I would say, well, just think about drug experiences, right? You talk about people who use DMT or people who use LSD. Amazing things happen. For me, what's amazing about that experience is not what the drug is doing, but the fact that brain tissue is capable of generating an experience of the world like that. In that instance, it's because of the drug. But, if you take the drug and you put it in the table...
But so can I. I can generate that same thing. I mean, this happened to at a party where I went to. My kids were there, and they were talking about doing shrooms, mushrooms.
Right.
And I said, and they were offering it to me, and I said, I don't need it. I have news for you. You're going to take that stuff to feel the way I feel right now without it. I don't need it.
Right.
And that's really what my life is about, is I am just being happy, joyful, and loving Like right now, I'm not going to do life, and I used to. I'm not going to do life to accomplish all these things and have all these things. So when I get it all and when I accomplish it all, then I will be happy and joyful
Oh,
and
no.
loving. That is not the plan that I'm on. I used to be.
No, I'm definitely not on that plan. I mean, I every time I talk about stuff like this, I feel like I want to also say that I'm not on that plan, but I haven't arrived yet. When people ask me where I am, I say I'm somewhere between martinis and meditation. Like, I think sometimes I enjoy a martini and I love the shape of the glass and I love what it feels like in my hand. And I also recognize what it doesn't bring me. And I recognize when it brings me a fake experience of what I want. And so it's a constant negotiation in the world. I don't think it's the easiest thing to be human, but I think it's the one calling we have to pay attention to. I think that being human is such a powerful gift. And on the one hand, we're wired in such a weird way that the things that we wish that we were ideally we're not. On the other hand, perhaps there is something in this art form and all of this madness. It's like, you wouldn't look at a Jackson Pollock painting or Da Vinci and say, God, I wish he had made Mona Lisa smiles a little bit, different. Like, why is the face not symmetrical? Or why doesn't Pollock make these things more orderly? Or look at a Basquiat painting. Like, why is that skull so?
But don't you think that's what gets us into all kinds of trouble all the time? That we're just not okay with just the way things are.
That's right. Exactly. and I think for me, that's why there's another part to this which I feel is really exciting, which is the chaos, right? The disorder. Like, why is Basquiat's art so compelling to me? Like, as soon as I look at a skull that Basquiat made and I look at what's going on, like something about his interiority is in the painting, and I just love it. And Damien Hirst has a similar effect on me, or Murakami. There's something about those particular artists. I have friends who hate all of those artists. And they're like, that's nonsense. Like, what is that? Like, I want a nice classical painting with a beautiful lake. And I feel like for me, I find it all incredibly beautiful and evocative. But when there is something in the resonance of the art, maybe a certain kind of acceptance of that imperfection and a kind of a comfortable representation, even symbolically, my theory is that reverberates with certain people. And if you can sit with the discomfort of it, you can realize after a while you're only uncomfortable because you have a preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be. And if you adjust to see what is, you suddenly find yourself in alignment with the world. And to me, that's a big piece of what it is to be alive. Is to
like that's the non-judgment you're talking about. Like there's no reason. There's this whole thing about right and wrong and judgment and all the stuff that we do. That's like, for me, it's just, it's a learned way of being, and I'm working on unlearning it, and just to accept what is, because it is that way. If it was supposed to be differently, it would be. It's not. It's the way it is. Like, I was late coming to the studio, and I just had to accept that I am late, and I can resist it all I want. It doesn't really matter. I am late, but I'm committed, and my intention is that this show will go on. Doesn't matter what. And it did go on, didn't it?
Right. Well, I think presence is an incredible power. I think presence is a power, and also when we place words on things like right or wrong or something, it takes you out of the subjective experience. It's like sometimes when you look at life and your life events as if you're walking through an art gallery, it's much more fulfilling than if you're saying, wait a minute, that's not right. Like like it should be some kind of technical drawing or architectural feature so that the building must sustain itself. I think that the human nature sustains itself when it is human. I think when it is not human is when it starts to fall apart.
Do you know who we credit that word to? Because I have no clue.
The word human?
Uh-huh.
I don't, actually.
Nobody does. I told you this network has been around for 12 years. I asked that question thousands of times. Nobody knows.
But you know what's interesting to me about that word, though? Because in the way that it's related to Homo sapien, it's interesting that only 10% approximately of our cells are Homo sapiens cells. 90% of who we are bacterial cells on the skin, in our bodies. We think of ourselves as being like a lot of human, right? We're like, oh, look at this face, body, hands. Like, it must be just a few bacteria here and there. No, it's only 10% of this is Homo sapien cells. 90% is bacteria. So I don't know the origin of human, but I do think it's interesting that
not only that, how about this? We're just scanning it with our eyes, and the scan is only as good as our eye. So
Right.
What's beyond the eye? If it can go beyond the eye, what would we see?
I wish I could tell you. I mean,
So how is it that we could begin to go beyond our five senses? Because so many of us are so stuck with these five senses, and I'm, to be honest with you, I'm bored with it. There's got to be a lot of things out there. I feel it. I know it. There's a lot of things out there beyond the five senses, and I believe that those things do exist.
I'm a huge advocate of this perspective that you're describing. So when I deliver workshops or talk to people, it's hard to get people to first believe scientifically that they should. I think the first thing is to question the senses. So if I said to you, I think you should only go to your five senses if you can convince me that your five senses will pick up everything that exists. So then you say, can you hear a dog whistle? No, but a dog can hear it. So your hearing can fail you. When you see a mirage, you're like, is there water? You're like, no, but your eye is telling you there's water. When you see all these illusions, you look at them and you see things that are not there. And suddenly you realize, you know what, there are limits to perception. So the scary part is we construct our notion of reality from these limited senses. And when we do, we come up with this very distorted picture of what's happening. So the first thing I would say is question perception. And there's a lot of data to support that. The second thing I would say is, for me personally, meditation has really introduced me to something outside of the senses. The third thing is, as I said, when I say I'm between Martinis and meditation, really what I mean is that I like something about the world as it is. I'm not necessarily only appreciative of the world in an ascetic state. I like it when I'm at a party and I love the connection that I'm feeling to people. I think in that state, you start to feel the impact of the collective that rises above what your literal senses can perceive. There was a really cool study that showed that there's an intelligence, and I truly believe, this is one of my most passionate feelings right now, that we are in the era of the collective, that alone, all we will all do is justify our own opinions. The study showed that there's an intelligence, a collective intelligence, that can be manifest, that's greater than the maximum intelligence in the group, and it's greater than the average intelligence in the group. And I think the fact that things exist in additive ways that you may not perceive, the fact that your senses may perceive you, may deceive you, I think is enough reason to ask yourself, well, what else is there? Because when you asked this question earlier, I was thinking, and this is sort of borrowed from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, but there are three ways in which we get information. Right? There's direct perception, there's basically inference, scriptural testimony, and direct perception. So scriptural testimony are the Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, the Gita. These give us some information. Then you have inference, which is I infer, because of my experience of the limitation of perceptions, that there must be something else that can help me construct reality. And then there's direct perception. And I believe that the kind of consciousness you're talking about is the consciousness that can afford perception beyond the senses. And that's where the big argument is. That's where people will say, either people will know what you're talking about, and I feel very resonant with it, or if they don't know it and they're stuck in a literal and linear world, they'll say it's psychotic, there's nothing. You're making up, you're having a seizure. Like whatever you think, it's some kind of seizure. There's no other experience of the world. You're making it up. Which, when people tell me something like that, I say, you could be right. I mean,
okay, so how do you explain something where, I'm thinking about somebody right now, and the next thing I know, within 2 minutes, I'll get a call from them. What do you call that?
I don't know what you would call it, but I think it's not unrelated to the experiment that I was telling you about, where if you can, if I can think a word in Spain and you're in India and you can hear it, then the reason you can do it in that instance is because we are connected through the internet. It raises the hypothesis of, is it possible that when you are strongly connected to someone, that there is a channel of communication that transmits the frequency of your thoughts into their minds, and then they think to call you. So,
Well, but doesn't this prove that we are really responsible for manifesting our own world and our own reality? And a lot of people believe that there's only one world, and there's 7 billion people, and I say that there are 7 billion people with 7 billion different worlds.
yeah, so I do think that we can interact with the world in a way that can help us advance our consciousness. And I do think that when we advance our consciousness, we can create levels of existence for ourselves that are beyond what ordinary perception would be able to create. You know, how it does that, I think science is beginning to explore that. And these examples I've given you, I think, for me, I find them helpful because they make me feel like we're at least showing this, you know, that these things exist. In some ways, science is lagging behind the spiritual world, because the spiritual world doesn't depend on observable evidence. It just depends on experience.
Do you feel that time and space really does exist, or we just bought into it?
I don't know. I mean, at a practical level, I need it. So,
well, for sure, for this show to occur, yes.
Right.
But I'm looking. We're way past our conscious hour, and this happens to me every time. Like, I don't want this show to end. Like we could do this all night long, because that's how good it is. My experience of it is so good that it's like I don't want it to end. But the conscious hour is over, and it didn't seem to me, based on my training of time, that this was an hour. Did it seem to you that way?
Not at all. No, I think in that sense, I think time. I'm suspicious of time, and I'm suspicious of time because I find the whole idea that we should define our existence by the Earth's rotation on its axis. I can't make the connection. I don't know how to make that. Like, so what if the Earth is moving? What does that have to do with anything? And then space.
The animals don't care about time.
No, and increasingly we're showing that we can bridge space, right? If you think about the fact that you are where you are, like you're in Denver, I'm in Boston, yet you're actually on my desk in Boston. Are you in Denver?
Am I?
Are you in Denver?
Yeah, I'm in Denver.
Or are you in Boston?
Or over there? Yeah, I'm at both places.
Yeah, and so
I'm on everybody else's desk that are watching right now.
Right, and so in that sense, I'm not sure about space. I think space. We are increasingly finding that space is not as limited as it seems. That we can bridge.
It's another construct of ours. Don't you think? It's another construct that just keeps us in this box, whatever this box is. There's just so much stuff I could talk to you about. This is just crazy. This is just absolutely. Have you seen The Matrix, the movie Matrix?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You must have enjoyed it somewhat, right?
I did a lot. It was fantastic.
Yeah. So, wow. I really don't want this to end. I don't even know. I mean, there's a final question I have that I got to ask you.
Sure.
So, I meditate every day myself. I meditate. Well, there's two things that I do every day. Well, there's many things I do that I do every day, but these are two things that I make sure that I don't forget to do. So, and it's not brushing my teeth. In the morning, I meditate, and it's usually between 7 to 10 minutes. And I'm having these experiences in these meditations where I'm having this feeling that I'm no longer even here. I don't know where I am. And I'm feeling this joy that I can't even describe. And I end up usually bawling from joy. And sometimes I have these interesting ideas that come to me. Um, like the other day, I had this interesting idea. What came to me is in my meditation is the flower of life. Are you familiar with the flower of life? I'm sure you are.
It's symbolic. I mean, I'm not. I don't know a lot.
Yeah, it's very symbolic. Yeah, and supposedly our entire body is full of the flower of life. But I can't describe it right now because it's a little bit complex. But I somehow had this idea that I was told that we must have people, and you got to look it up on Google now, the flower of life, and see what it's like.
Sure.
It's round and it has these. I don't even know how to describe it. These flowers, but you just have to look at it. And I had this idea that we as humans need to gather like that and meditate like that. And I don't know where the heck that came from. It didn't come from me. It's just something I just received. Does this mean anything to you?
I don't know enough about the flower of life factually, but whatever you're saying resonates as something worth exploring. And the reason it does is because the way you're describing receiving that information resonates as truth to me. It sounds to me like it has the quality of sudden insight. So I couldn't prove it, but if you ask me to offer my judgment on the resonance of what you're talking about, I would say that it has the resonance of a sudden insight.
Like for some reason, I felt that this has never, like I told you on the show earlier, that I am like interested in things that have never been done before, and this is just one of those things that I don't think that has ever been done before. It's like I'm the first one that perhaps thought this. I don't know that for sure. It may not be, and certainly not that I put it out there. It won't be, but that's okay.
But it feels like that. It actually does feel like that. It has a, I also don't know whether people thought about that specifically, but there's something about the way you're communicating it to me that feels like a sudden insight, and it has a texture of originality that is a judgment we make one way or another.
So I gotta show it. I have a picture of it actually on my wall. Hang on.
Sure.
And yes, this is the first time I've ever done this. This is a first right here. Okay, so this is what the flower of life looks like. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I was imagining is that these symbols are people, and they all touching each other, and these are like pods. And if we gather like this as people and meditate together, something incredible will happen.
I mean, it makes physiologic sense for sure, because we know, there's a lot of data that backs up brain changes with individual meditation. And then there's this data looking at mirror neurons. So if I am meditating and I am near you, it's probably going to impact your brain, which will impact the next brain and the brain. And so you'll get all these additive and super additive effects. So I find it quite a logical conclusion. I think it's, but more compelling than that is some kind of non-logical awareness that I can feel you've applied to that I would think it's worth trying in some way. Why not?
Now I gotta make it happen.
I would say I'm very interested in a particular element of this, which is the connection between art and science. I think it would be really amazing to get a dance troupe together and have them make that formation and have part of the dance movement be like 30 to 60 seconds of mindfulness and see what happens in the middle of that dance. Mm-hmm. I think it would be really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the conscious hour is over. I absolutely loved you to be on the show and to be on the network. It's like you are just so easy to be with. And I have these experiences over and over again. It's like I've known you all my life, and I know you for an hour. An hour and 5 minutes is all I know you for.
It's really fantastic, and I really appreciate having such a spontaneous conversation and having, I think, the intention to have this energy manifest so that when other people resonate with parts of it, it will impact parts of their lives, so they will become part of this flower arrangement that you're talking about.
Uh-huh. So here's somebody is asking well, it's a comment, actually, another question, but so there's this comment that says, I was just going to say, can this conversation go on forever? Yes, it can, and it does, right here at consciousevolutionmedia.com. and elsewhere. This is not the only place. There's many places that this conversation happens. So go ahead.
No, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of it. I really appreciate that, and for creating the space to do that.
I would love you to come back at any time. So, Dr. Srini, you've been absolutely fantastic, and I just want to acknowledge you for being who you are, and I'm just connecting to what am I experiencing, who you are, and who you are for me is someone that's very, very brave. That's the energy that I'm getting, that you're a very brave human being, and a very open human being, and I loved every second of it. Thank you very much for being here.
Well,
for everybody else, if you have experienced something here that touched, moved, and inspired you, continue to come back onto our YouTube channel. And if you watch this show, and tell everybody that you know, and everybody keeps watching, it has the potential, of course, to go viral, and also to go onto the top 10 list on our monthly top 10 list. And if it makes it there, it has the potential to go to public television, as well as to this new social media, actually a social television network that's starting in the summer. That's going to be huge. That could make our network a household name, and I'm looking forward to that. So thank you so much. Everybody have a great evening and a beautiful weekend. For a lot of people, this is a 3-day weekend. Have fun, joy, prosperity, love, and everything else you can think of. Thank you so much. I love you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.